Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention now. We're going to, I want to introduce to you our speaker for this evening, who I think we're very, very fortunate to have here. If anybody wants to argue with somebody about the benefits and the wonders and the marvels of socialized medicine, this is the gentleman to do it with. Dr. Yuri Maltsev, Associate Professor of Economics at Carthage College, Wisconsin, and a Peace Fellow of the United States Institute of Peace, held over a 15-year period various teaching and research positions in Moscow, Russia. Before coming to the U.S., in 1989, he was a member of a senior team of Soviet economists that worked on President Gorbachev's reforms package and a chief consultant of the USSR Bank for Foreign Trade. During his 5 years in the United States, he has visited 43 states of the Union, giving lectures at leading universities, corporations, banks, colleges, churches, schools, and community centers. He has charmed diverse audiences with his wry humor, hand in hand with his shrewd analysis of the current economic and political situation, prospects for freedom, and outlooks for business opportunities for American entrepreneurs in Russia and Eastern Europe. Dr. Maltsev has also appeared on cable network news, financial network news, McNeil-Lehrer NewsHour, C-SPAN, CBN, CBC, and other American, Canadian, Russian, Spanish, and Finnish television and radio programs. He has authored 5 books and over 70 articles. Before settling in the Midwest, he was a Peace Fellow at the United States Institute of Peace in Washington, D.C., a research institution sponsored by the United States Congress. There, he analyzed problems of the post-communist transition to a market economy, with special emphasis on privatization and deregulation. Accordingly, Dr. Maltsev has had the extremely rare experience of working in senior analytical positions for both the American and Soviet governments. Dr. Maltsev serves as a governor of the Heartland Institute in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and is a member of the advisory boards of the Wisconsin Forum and the Rockford Institute and the Free Market Society of Chicago. At this time, I'd like to introduce our speaker of the evening, Dr. Yuri Maltsev.
Well, yes, I was listening to my own biography and kind of sounded like, I think, a mental history case. Yes, I have really a bizarre experience, I would call it, not rare, but bizarre experience of working for major bureaucracies on this planet, for Soviet government, and then when I moved to Washington, D.C., to the United States Institute of Peace, which is a congressional think tank, which actually thinks more than it thinks. It's an exciting, I would say, very exciting form of congressional waste. I already shared with my neighbors at the table that the person sitting next to me was Eugene Rostow, who I was thinking back in Moscow is the most famous warmonger of this planet. And he was also a Peace Fellow of the United States Congress. I was also trying to figure out what's the kind of a common pattern at this meeting. And I was thinking about Pavlov dogs. Maybe you probably studied physiology, right? And the conditional reflex of Pavlov dogs would be to switch on the light, right, and serve the food. Here we have the food is served usually as a called good complement to an economic speech. So today I think I would like to share with you some experiences I had in working with on economic reforms back in the Soviet Union, and some of these reforms would be social reforms, including reforms of the healthcare system. And when I came to the United States, and quite recently during all this discussions of the Clinton's healthcare plan, I was honored to ask to sign an open letter to President Clinton on the healthcare plan, which I signed together with 499 economists in the United States, and 9 of them are Nobel Prize winners. And the letter dealt with the issue of price controls. And even the people who would take Economics 101 would know that price control is just next to nuclear bomb. It's destructive everything. You can destroy not only one industry, you can destroy the whole country in a very, I would say, limited amount of time with price controls. Also, I think there is a certain pattern that each of the presidents from Democratic Party would pick up an industry to destroy. It was steel industry under John Kennedy. It was oil industry under Jimmy Carter. And right now, you folks are very unfortunate that it's kind of your turn to be destroyed. So the price controls, whether it's socialized medicine or when it's completely planned from top to bottom, or whether it's managed care, price controls are very negative, would create a shortage of high quality care and any kind of something wrong with this device. I have a friend in Washington, she all the time would say, keep away from my car. If Russians are around, nothing works. Yeah, the microphone which worked perfectly well before. Well, the Soviet Union is, I would say, it's a spectacular example of the country which was completely ruined by its own government. I mean, without any external help, just by applying wrong economics, the country which could be one of the richest countries in the world, the country with very rich in natural resources and gifted people, even if you look into the sphere of American economics, the best economists actually came from Russia. Milton Friedman's parents came from Odessa. Murray Rothbard, who died 3 months ago, an Austrian economist, he was born in Bobruisk, Belarus. And Mr. Astmus, whom we heard during this lunchtime, he also said that he has some Russian blood. So the healthcare was probably suffered even more than steel or oil industries in the Soviet Union. In 1918, the Soviet Union was the first country to proclaim that there is a right, a basic human right for the healthcare. And it was, it was one of the first decrees of Vladimir Lenin, the first leader of the Soviet Union. Other constitutional so-called rights would include the rights, for example, for free dental care, for free vacations, for the safe environment, and other kind of, I would say, mass enticing abracadabra. Because what is right, what is not. I mean, if I'm exercising my right to free speech, then at least I'm not inflicting material damage on you, right? But if I am exercising my right for free housing, then somebody is paying, right? And we see the same revival, the same doctrine of socioeconomic rights here. I would call him only Comrade Ira Magaziner. He is one of the most kind of staunchest advocates of these socioeconomic rights. He believed that healthcare is not a market phenomenon, it's a right. And so as being a right, it should be probably planned and rationed. And in the United States, I would say the liberal media created an issue, created an image of Russia that it's the country where maybe some economic problems were not solved properly, but social problems were. That people would have a confidence in tomorrow, that people would have a free access to healthcare, free access to education, free access to housing, and on and on and on. Yes, they had free access to, say, healthcare, but what kind of healthcare? Today in Russia, the life expectancy for males is 62, for females 67 years, which is what, about 14, respectively 14 and 12 years less than that in the United States. Infant mortality rate, that's another good, I think, indicator which shows you the quality of healthcare, the quality of nutrition, the social hygiene in the country. It's 55 right now, 55 deaths per 1,000 of live births. So it's higher even than in the District of Columbia. In the United States, on average, it's 8.1. So I don't think we should have anything to learn from Soviet type of organization of healthcare. My sister, she's I'm the only black sheep in the family. All my family are medical people, and my sister, she right now works for Argonne National Laboratory. We're all the time having discussions about that she's wasting your money on some dangerous projects called Human Genome Project. Probably how to engineer good taxpayers or whomever. And but she is an immunologist, so she had an access to the secret Soviet statistics on health, according to which, for example, 78% of all HIV positive people in the former Soviet Union got their AIDS from the tainted blood and dirty needles in the state-run hospitals on a good side for free. So the healthcare system was in appalling state. In 1987, when perestroika started, and I was kind of thinking that it's the last chance for the country, I was elected by, it was more or less, I would say, free elections at that time already. And I was elected as a people's deputy, which is something like local councillor here, and in a constituency near Moscow. And I had, I think, maybe about half of all complaints of the people about healthcare would come on, the complaints would be on a drunk ambulance crews, for example. On the people would be misdiagnosed to the point that they will be dead in 3 or 4 hours. That's the quality of healthcare really was a great problem. It was a black market for healthcare as well. Moreover, black market sometimes would be like islands in a white market. That means that if you are having, I had a friend and he had a heart surgery, and a surgeon, I was with my friend, and even it was 2 witnesses, but the surgeon was blatantly, he said, that this type of surgeries has a very high lethality rate. So he said, to prevent that, I need 10,000 rubles. So that's the, I wouldn't say it's the, and it also started with price controls. So the, understandingly that the bureaucrats in the Soviet Union would not like to be treated this way. So every time when you have price control, when you have socialized medicine, then you see the emergence of the so-called parallel system. Parallel system for bureaucrats, for government officials, for all kinds of apparatchiks, whether that's Moscow or Washington, D.C. We have a very good healthcare system, I think, for our great leaders. Referring to the parallel system of healthcare already in existence in the United States, Dr. Butler of Heritage Foundation remarked, he said, why reinvent the wheel? If a working healthcare system already exists that's good enough for official Washington, why not to use it as our model, improve upon it, and let the rest of America enjoy the same kind of program as members of Congress and Clinton's White House staff? And the same system existed in Soviet Union since 1921. So it took only 3 years for communist bureaucrats to realize that they would not live for long if they would not create a special system for themselves. And that was very appalling to see how the patients would die because of the absence of some drugs which would be sitting idle, expiring in this parallel system for nomenclatura, for this government apparatchiks. The parallel system also I would say the parallel system also had a lot of flaws, because the doctors would be picked up on political grounds. Not the way they can perform surgery, but what would count how long they've been in the Communist Party. And sometimes it's just quite opposite qualities. The longer you are in the Communist Party, the worse you are as a surgeon. In some parts of Russia, the healthcare organization of healthcare is just appalling. In rural Russia, in central Russia itself, in a rural district, 57% of all hospitals do not have running hot water. 36 of hospitals located in these rural areas of Russia do not have nor water nor sewage. And that's the country which would send people to space, which would be considered as a superpower number 2. And you can see that when the bureaucrats would go amok with national priorities, then you can see that people are dying. The major cause, for example, of infant mortality rate in Russia is diarrhea. That means the absence of the primary health care and bad drinking water. In some parts of Russia, especially in the so-called autonomous republics, infant mortality rate, like, for example, Sakha, Kalmykia, it's about 100, 112, say, in Kalmykia. That brings these parts of Russia to the same category, to the same stage of economic development as, say, Bangladesh, or Somalia, or Chad. And that was a superpower number 2 we were so scared about. The problem also, I mean, that the people in that republics would live in such appalling socioeconomic conditions that definitely they want to secede. They want to secede. And right now, I would say, for me, it's very sad to see how Mr. Clinton will go to Moscow and embrace these murderers of Chechen people who are still fighting for their independence. And the health care is practically non-existent there in Chechnya. I've been to Chechnya several times. And the country it's the same experience you have if you will travel, for example, to rural India, say northwestern part of India. I've been there. Just more or less the same. And it's very bad that we are supporting morally, well, not we, but they would support morally this kind of things. The environmental problems in Russia, that they would contribute a lot to the appalling situation with healthcare. Environment, we have a lot of environmentalists in the United States. While most of them are honest people who really want to have clean environment and to have a diversity of all kinds of species. But we have also very strong movement of somebody I would call watermelons, who are green from outside and red inside. And they're trying to exploit the environmental problems to promote the idea of big government, to promote the idea of overall government regulations. And this idea didn't work in the Soviet Union at all. The command and control in the sphere of environment was probably the tightest in the world. They had the whole ministry of environment. They had several 100,000 apparatchiks in all parts of the former Soviet Union. And then if you look into the quality of environment, it's something the Russians would call the environmental Auschwitz. Because practically some parts of Russia, some parts of Ukraine especially, and the Baltics, were completely destroyed by pollution, by uncontrolled socialist economizing. So it's not the free market, but it's the central planning, which is the most, I would say, dangerous weapon against environment. With the healthcare and planning, any kind of tinkering with, I think, with everything which is very important for people is very dangerous. I remember last year I was listening to a mayor of Moscow, at that time Mr. Popov, Gavril Popov, who is considered to be the most free market economist in the Soviet Union, in Russia. He was speaking at the American Enterprise Institute, and he said, yes, we should privatize everything, except maybe natural monopolies. Well, being kind of a very suspicious economist, I immediately asked him, like what? He said, well, maybe like highways, like sewage system, like bakeries. I said, bakeries? Come on, why it's a natural monopoly? Why you should have a government running bakeries? He said, because bakeries are very important for people. The bread is a basic staple. I said, that's exactly the major reason that they should be privatized first. And healthcare definitely is not something we should let the faceless bureaucrats in Washington to tinker with. I worked for a while there in the Soviet Department of Labor, whatever it was. It was, labor was kind of forced there, so it was more like a kind of central planning apparatus, how to misuse people. And that department in 1980, I think, in 1980, this ailing Soviet dictator, Mr. Brezhnev, assigned us a task force, created a task force, including myself and other members of this labor department, to work on the healthcare reform. And because the conditions of the healthcare were so appalling that people really, were kind of on the brink of revolting, especially in some parts of former Soviet Union. And all these reforms were put into the scratching halt by Politburo member Mikhail Suslov, who I remember waived, you can't imagine what, he waived the report prepared by a task force headed by Senator Edward Kennedy in 1979 for the Senate Committee on Labor, and the report was called Healthcare Around the World, where Soviet Union was cited as the country with practically no health problems. The country which we should learn here a lot in organization of the healthcare. So Senator Kennedy helped, I would say, to some extent Soviet people by providing the Soviet bureaucrats with this excuse not to do anything because, as they would say, look, even imperialists are forced to admit how great we are. That I'm quoting Mr. Suslov. Well, today, Russia is in the middle of the horrible health crisis. The influenza is befalling children. Rickets, which is unknown in civilized world, is very much widespread, especially in rural areas. Uterine damage is widespread thanks to 7.3 abortions an average Russian woman would go through her childbearing years. And the hypocrisy of this approach is, I remember in 1988, I was on a panel with the Deputy Minister for Health of the Soviet Union. It was on Soviet TV, and it was the first call-in program. Before that, usually they would pre-tape everything, maybe 3 weeks in advance, and there will be no live programs on Soviet TV. And when people were calling, and somebody called, he said, why we don't have condoms? That's what our liberals should, I think, know. And that deputy minister, complete jerk, he said, don't do it. You don't need condoms. But this person was insisting, he said, the AIDS epidemics is coming to Russia, whatever, how we should protect ourselves. He said, go to public library. You will never get AIDS there. That was that was the most arrogant response of, I think, and our socialists should know that, because they believe that under socialist or communist conditions, the condoms will be hanging on all trees available to children starting from the age 5. So that's the hypocrisy of regime. I was actually reminded about that. Recently, I was watching C-SPAN, and Mr. Clinton was addressing a Democratic crowd in Los Angeles. Was a convention of Californian Democrats. Maybe some of you saw this speech. He said, tax cut, $500. This is insane, he said. This is insane. To give it to these people who will blow it away? I'm quoting. He said we should invest this money into our future, into our competitiveness. So instead of saying that why we should give, the first thing, I mean, for me, especially where I'm coming from, was strange to see that he believes that cutting taxes, he's giving the money to people. Yeah. Giving them. Instead of saying, well, kind of underlooting them by $500, that we're giving this money to people. And what kind of trust into people he has if he is saying they will blow this money away. And let's better entrust this money to some bureaucracy in Washington, kind of in a department of the future, who would invest it properly and Today, as a sad legacy of the socialist experiment in the Soviet Union, we see a declining, all the time declining rates of fertility, Today we have the population is decreasing in Russia by 600,000 people a year. So it's not on the increase, it's on the decrease all the time. That's the only way the people can vote against appalling living and working conditions in the country. Well, the only also the problems, I mean, we experience here in the United States is that we don't have this type of health crisis. I think Hayek was absolutely right when he said that to expand the government, you need a crisis. And the crisis can be real, can be fabricated, or can be imaginary. And that's what I think is happening. I think that it's mostly imaginary crisis, that certainly the system which exists today is not maybe perfect, and it's not perfect for sure. If you will especially keep in mind that 49% of all expenditures for the healthcare in the United States are coming from the government here already. We have about 4,000 hospitals owned and operated by the government, Veterans Administration's hospitals, Indian hospitals. And so you can see what kind of quality health care the government can provide. But it's again, and you can see that healthcare right now, all the countries which socialized medicine are trying to privatize it today. And we're kind of moving in the opposite direction. And back in Wisconsin, I'm helping a lot of, we have something called Nursing Consortium of Wisconsin. And they have an exchanges with Russian nurses. So it's called Russian-American Nurse Exchange. And just talking to these nurses is appalling. In emergency room, they have the ratio of 45 to 50 patients per nurse. Can you imagine, I mean, what kind of quality of healthcare you can have. They also gave me a very interesting clipping from the newspaper, Izvestia, published recently. And this clipping said that the title of the article is Sovietization of American Medicine. The first sentence is that it looks the United States is moving to the positions we are just abandoned. And it's really sad to see that there is a Russian proverb, quite cynical one, that the only lesson of history is that it does not teach us anything. And to see this is quite, definitely we have a problem with costs. Right now we spend 14.3% of our GDP on healthcare. Well, I don't think it's surprising if you would figure out that the Pentagon, for example, is overpaying up to 40% of real costs of everything. And if the government is covering 49% of all expenditures, then from another hand, if kind of to make comparisons, the United States is the richest country in the world. So what should people buy? Healthcare, I believe, is a normal good. It's a normal good. That means, in economics, that the wealthier you are, the more you demand of it. That the wealthier you are, what you are supposed to buy more? Booze or what? Military expenditure? Sure, I think it's a natural process that the richer is the country, the more it spends on healthcare. If you look on these dreadful statistics, dreadful in quotes, which Comrade Magaziner is trying to scare us, you would see that there is a direct relationship between the wealth of the nation and the amount spent on the healthcare. Russia, for example, spends today 3.7% of their GDP on the healthcare. And so they get what they paid for. Britain, somebody would say, I mean, there's a lot of Marxist-Leninists. I was kind of had a cultural shock when I was probably one of the last defectors of this century. So when I came to the United States, I was absolutely surprised by the number of true believers in communism here. In Russia, it looks like formally everybody was, but nobody did. I mean, you could not believe in communism when you cannot find, say, soap or sausage or anything in the state stores. So you just see that the system doesn't work. Here, with the unlimited amount of quite inexpensive chicken, it's easy to believe in communism because you don't see how destructive it is. And I work in a college, and especially among the teachers of economics, I'm probably also a black sheep, in the sense that other people are all the time telling us something that they did it wrong. We should do it here, and we would do it right. That means it's kind of, I would say, kind of cultural arrogance that anything Russians do, they do wrong. But it was not only Russians. 38 countries practiced socialism, 38, including Germans, who usually would do everything right. and if even Germans failed to do it, then I don't think anyone else can. So that's moreover, recently was in a proper place, I think it happened in Amherst, Massachusetts. The University of Massachusetts in Amherst hosted the World Marxist Congress. There was 3,000 Marxists came all over the United States. And they adopted it. Well, I mean, you cannot ignore, right, that the Marxist state collapsed all around the world. So they were supposed to react in this or that way. So they adopted the strangest resolution I ever read. The resolution said that what happened in Soviet Union and Eastern Europe was not a collapse of socialism, but was a collapse of something they call state capitalism, which sounds like an oxymoron to me. And so the end of resolutions said that capitalism failed again. This time ruined. But if you will look at the results of socialized medicine in Western countries, in civilized countries, you would see also that in England, for example, the national health care, which they introduced in 1948, led to the appalling situation of deprivation, especially of the elderly citizens, of any access to high-quality health care. For example, in England, the person would not be even considered for hemodialysis if he or she is over 65 years old. In Canada, you can see also they're planning. They're not treating like people differently because of age on the level of practitioner, but the funds are planned. If there is a community consisting mostly of people over 45, they have three categories. Below 45, between 45 and 55, and over 55. So I would say the first category would be probably active taxpayers. And they would receive more attention, at least finance-wise. So if you are in charge of the community where mostly senior citizens are living, then the funds provided to you by the state would be not higher as they should be, right, from all logic, but they would be lower than that provided to the communities with in England, I lived there for a while, and you would be put, you know, everything. I mean, the waiting lists for surgery, sometimes year and a half, rationing of drugs, medicine. So it's it's really very, very sad. In Soviet Union, they had a very planned approach, kind of funny sometimes. For example, and they would, at first, they would be obsessed with costs the same way as our first ladies. And so they would say, they would have the planned reduction of costs. Then the people will start to die in the state-run hospitals. Then how to deal with that problem? Instead of letting the costs go high a little bit, they would introduce another planning target, the reduction in lethality rate. The mortality should be reduced in a planned fashion. So then you see a lot of ambulances driving around dying people back home. So I was in the hospital myself at that time, and I remember that how lively the doctors would discuss whether the patient in the next room whether he is really dangerous or not. And dangerous not in the sense that he would die, but dangerous that he would die and spoil their statistics. And they're getting some bonuses if they will reduce the mortality, so they wouldn't treat anybody who really needs health care. That's the... Today, Russia is trying to privatize its health care. They introduced already some, I would say, strange funds which pay 42,000 rubles per one person to a hospital per year. That's whether the person uses medical facilities or not. 42,000 rubles right now, the ongoing exchange rate is 5,300 rubles per $1. So you can imagine how much is that. Will be what, $6 or $7 per year. So that's why that besides the aspirin and other basic things, I have a friend, he is a neurosurgeon in Novosibirsk, and I talk to him over the phone when I can get through. And he said they have these lights in the operation room, and they're supposed to have 24 bulbs. Right now he said they have 7, and he doesn't know what to do when it'll be gone. So you can imagine what it's very difficult here in the United States to imagine what really the government can do to its own people. It's in complete neglect. It's really very... The legacy of communism is that I think that we should learn a lesson from what kind of deadly experiments these people staged on themselves. Not many people in the United States know, for example, that 42 million Russians, Ukrainians, Belarusians, Armenians, and other people of the Soviet Union were physically slaughtered, 42 millions, during the Stalinist purges. Well, some of them would be shot, some of them would die because of starvation, of epidemics, but on the premises of the KGB. And can you imagine how many executioners, henchmen, are still around there? So it's a very sad, I think, sad lesson to learn, but I think we should not ignore it. Because, again, it's very strange to see that the same old ideas are just wrapped in kind of new clothing being tried to sold here in the United States. Well, I think it was kind of a bad, probably, dinner speech because it was not as cheerful as... But from another hand, I am very proud to be part of your program. I think that you're doing a great thing here, and I feel myself safer to know that you're around, that we wouldn't have, at least there are people who would oppose the ideas of central planning, especially in such a crucial field of our life as healthcare. Well, if I haven't bored you completely, then I would be happy to maybe discuss some questions if you have. Mm-hmm.
I have a colleague in our state that made a trip to the former Soviet Union in the early 80s, and he came back just praising what he had seen over there in the way of medicine. What did they show him?
Mm-hmm. Yes, they know what to show.
Yeah.
Well, actually, Clementine Churchill was kind of started this trend. She was in Russia in 1947. She returned back to England at the beginning of Cold War. She returned back to England. She said there is only one privileged class in Russia, and that's children. And that was so appalling for Russians to even to hear, because it was not children who were driving her around in black limos. It were not children who would receive her in Kremlin. But when the people are saying something which is obviously black, saying that's white, it's well, they have a lot of showcases, especially in Moscow. In Moscow, I remember we would have people like, for example, John Kenneth Galbraith, who would come to Moscow, would see all these awful things, and would be on the national TV saying, "You guys don't realize how great you are." And all these poor people eating all kind of garbage, watching this TV, would really be mad. The governor of Wisconsin, Robert La Follette, he was in Russia in 1937, when they were killing people with a speed of 15,000 a day. He returned back to Madison, Wisconsin. He said, "I saw the future and it works." So it was, we call these people pilgrims. This would come. It's because I think when you already have an opinion, then you're going there and seeing only what you want to see. And also you talk to people who are willing to talk to you, and until recently that would be mostly KGB officers. So even this nursing exchange, for example, right now it looks like genuine nurses are coming, but they started some time ago, before this perestroika started. They would send our nurses there to Russia, and they would receive back KGB officers. I mean, it would be whole males. Nobody ever saw a male nurse in Russia.
What is, in view of what you say, what is the mentality of the educational system there in youth?
The educational system, it was actually completely deprived of any mentality before. It was a system of brainwashing, but because they needed in social sciences. Social sciences were non-existent. It was a party slogans, kind of courses in propaganda. But because the leadership needed the people who would create the missiles, would create nuclear bombs, all other kind of military hardware, then usually the education, the inexact sciences, as they would call them, would be, I would say, higher than here in the United States. They would just pay more attention to, I mean, with my students, for example, when I first started to teach here undergraduates, and you know that it's difficult to teach economics without graphs. I was just teaching them with graphs, and only a week later I realized that I lost half of the class. Lost half of the class. Some people would never even, some people, for example, in the Soviet Union, physics, chemistry, mathematics, physiology even, would be a must for a high school. You cannot go around that. But in the United States, I mean, I have some friends who never had chemistry in the high school. It's a system of electives. You study something bad about Columbus, and that's it.
Can you comment on what we call the resource-based relative value scale? Where is that to pay positions, that payment program attached about 6 years ago?
Well, it's the in economic theory here. I wouldn't say it's economics, but I would kind of say it's also socialist type of social sciences. There is the idea of comparative worth, and that's the idea is that the government should come up with a set of standards, how to pay, whom to pay for what, and then anyone who is kind of contributing to this standard should be paid based on their comparative worth, based on but it's very difficult to find out the good indicators. I mean, what would be the indicator of, for example, successive treatment? I mean, very difficult. I mean, it's difficult because what's the final product? And what do you consider a final product? For example, the lower mortality. But it's applicable probably to, I would say it's again social engineering and central planning, because if you would pick up any indicator except, say, customer satisfaction, then you would be, in most cases, it would be very difficult to monitor. I mean, how and what are the factors? And
well, wasn't it a case really of divide and conquer?
yeah, oh, definitely, absolutely. But it's also the case, I think, that who is for socialized medicine, I think, to whom it's appealing? It's to politicians, to intellectuals. Intellectuals have a lust for power, and it's very nice to know that you come up with ideas which would really change the lives of a lot of people. For better or worse, it doesn't matter much. But kind of important person.
We have seen over the last 6 months in reports comparing the cost to the government of care for senior citizens in HMOs versus care for a comparative group done in private doctors' offices. And to everyone's dismay, it was cheaper to treat them by the private physician in his office. Now, I'm and you see that in the newspaper and it disappears. How, having been exposed to making information disappear that wasn't part of the party line, have you got any suggestions for us for making that kind of information come to the fore? I mean, we just heard from our Senator Bennett in Utah, who said he told my partner at a meeting, everybody inside the Beltway is convinced that the HMO and managed care is the only way we're going to save Medicare.
Yes, well, it's easy for me to understand how you do these things, because in Soviet Union, for example, they would accuse somebody of horrendous crimes like Trotsky or whomever. Then they would even confiscate all the newspapers from public libraries. And then they will reprint these newspapers without mentioning his name anymore. And they would return them back. Can you imagine? It's, Winston Churchill once said, Russia is the only country in the world with unpredictable past. So it's difficult to say anything about their future. But right now I believe we are also moving in that direction. And soon we will become a nation with unpredictable past. I was in Monticello recently, and the house of Thomas Jefferson, and the guide presented Thomas Jefferson to me as a kind of a slave owner, womanizer, whatever. You couldn't even find out who the person was besides. But with this, I mean, it's obvious. I mean, if you will look at the New York Pravda or Washington Pravda, which is Washington Post or New York Times, they print not what's going on, but they print what you should think about that. And that's the reason I'm reading that, because I need to know what the elite wants me to think. And that's one thing. Another thing, that all these comparisons, whether it's an HMO, it's cheaper or more expensive, all the studies, I would say, are kind of phony. Phony in the sense that HMOs, I mean, it's difficult to compare. You have price controls, then you can make another study saying that, yeah, what if we will, in a planned fashion, reduce that again? I mean, different HMOs are doing differently. A lot of HMOs really cut the cost, but at the expense of the quality of care, at the expense of the patient. And then definitely you can reduce the healthcare costs to zero, but would it be good for the patients? Would it be good for the healthcare system? I mean, that's why Lenin, I think, was right. He would say that there is lie, there is big lie, and then comes statistics. That's the.
Speaking of Lenin, one of his quotes that we hear often about is his quote that said that the key to socialism is medicine.
Yes, well, if you would read Lenin, who wrote 55 volumes of garbage, you would find out that I was going through all these labors of I mean, in the Soviet public school, then in Soviet university, we were supposed to learn some stuff practically by heart. And he would say the same about everything. So just don't take it seriously. If you will go to you will go in all Soviet post offices, for example, the main slogan was, socialism is a good post office. So everything was important, healthcare, post offices, anything. So that's why he didn't mean much. The healthcare system, a good friend of mine, his name is Aaron Kancelinin-Boygin, he teaches in Wharton School at University of Pennsylvania. He's from Russia himself. And he came up with a good idea, and I think he kind of formalized it. I mean, most Russians were thinking that's true, that they would need healthcare or they would need consumer goods just to keep these workers who are working for the military in kind of shape. See what I mean? That if you will have only sick people who don't have food or good clothing or anything, then what kind of missiles, what kind of nuclear bombs you can do with that?
Well, in light of that, that sounds very sort of utilitarian in its approach to healthcare. In other words, if you have people who are of employable age group or skills, then those people, there might be more effort provided for them to have health care. What about when they're older, becoming more infirm, not really very useful in a utilitarian sense to the state, to society. Would the quality of their health care or their access to health care in the Soviet Union decline?
Well, actually, when we looked into this healthcare, fortunately, I was quite healthy there, so that's the only reason I survived through all this healthcare, because I was not much of a patient in the system. But when we looked into the healthcare reform ideas in 1988, then we found out that there is 231 different systems in the Soviet Union of healthcare provision. That most huge enterprises, most ministries, they would have their own parallel systems for their workers. Meaning that there would be the healthcare system for general population, for which everyone is entitled to, would be the lowest one. It will be like mostly for the people, as Soviet government would think, good for nothing people. But that would be mostly old age people, would be children in this lower kind of category of
those who were not of utility to the
right, or the people between jobs or whatever. Most enterprises, especially military, they would have their own polyclinics, their own hospitals, which would be better. But at least not as appalling as the system for that. Then the Communist Party would have its own system, which would be the best one, so the called Fourth Directorate of the Ministry of Health. These people would, the average expenditures per patient, I remember in 1987, the statistics we had working on these healthcare reforms, was about, at that time, about 800 rubles per patient in the general system and about 7,000 in the nomenclatura system. So it was about 9 times higher. Nomenclatura system also, because I worked for Bud introduced me as a person who worked as an economic advisor to late Soviet government. I don't take all the blame. I was not the advisor. I was an advisor. It was because of that, I would at least go every year through the regular medical checkup. It will be 2 weeks doing nothing, just sitting in the hospital. That's how they would treat bureaucrats. And the hospitals were really very different from what at least would be a separate room and be something to, they would have a lot of equipment, Western equipment, for the government people. At the same very time, I got some complaints from my constituency about the most appalling kind of cases of neglect. And
with socialism, then, with all things being equal, it's just that some people were more equal than others?
Oh yes, definitely. That's the whole, I think, it's never, socialism is based on public property. So the idea is that most Soviets would think that nobody owns anything. But they were wrong, because the government people, apparatchiks, nomenclatura, that will be like their collective ownership. They would run the country, they would collect the loot, they would do everything. Today it's the most obvious, with this widespread crime in Russia, the crime is, why they have such an upsurge in crime? Because they adopted so many absurd laws. Right now Russia moved from socialism, to my mind, to the direction of kind of fascist economy. That you can have a title for the property, but you can exercise your right over the property the same way as you can exercise your right on the wetlands in the United States. That you have the property, you cannot do anything with that. They have 111 different taxes. They recently introduced, just to kind of give you an idea what kind of economic thinking is there, it's even worse than in Washington, D.C., they introduced export tax. Can you imagine if Japan would introduce something like that? Export tax. And the idea is not import tariff, but export tax. The idea is that why foreigners should enjoy the fruits of our labor, while we don't have plenty of everything. Export tax. Investment tax, another, 26%. You want to invest to Russia? Go ahead, at first pay 26% to Russian treasury just immediately. So my advice, go to Thailand.
It's been really painful after the elan of the wall going down and what seemed to be a wonderful verge of opportunity for the millions of people who've been deprived for these 70 years. And yet you think that if we were to come up with the $50 billion and pour it into the top, some kind of assistance, a Marshall Plan for Eastern Europe, and pour it into the top, that it would just all end up in the apparatchiks' pockets.
Oh, it'll just go.
Nothing will get done to the people.
It's like
We had an idea a while back of starting a system of exchanges. You talked of nurses, but of taking workers and bringing them over and letting them live with a man who owns a gas station, and let them stay, not to bring their family, not to stay permanently, but for 6 months or a year, and learn how to hire people, how to get a loan, how you fire an incompetent employee, how you do inventory, what a bank does, and then send them back. And they would, we were thinking that they would get more information on how to run a business and develop a capitalist economy than any other way.
Well, I was
Comment on
I was teaching both in Moscow and even in Washington, D.C., Soviet managers, the managers from there, how to run an enterprise, how to do accounting, what systems of accounting you have. The only problem is that these people don't decide anything. I mean, they will return back, and they cannot nor fire nor hire anybody. They don't have any access to any loans unless they will give a bribe. So I think they will be very misguided if they will spend some time here. See, I mean, definitely they will be different people. Maybe they will be better as voters. They will kind of understand where these other people are coming from. But from another hand, I believe that the best assistance we can provide them is to show them a good example of the limited government, of very strong human rights, of protection of property, liberty, life. Also, I think that some maybe educational programs would be good. I just shared with Ralph that I was on a panel some time ago with Walter Williams. You know, Walter Williams, he's from George Mason University. He is an African-American, a black economist, he calls himself. And we were discussing this Russian aid. So I said that would be the best thing, good example. Maybe bring young people here, teach them free market economics. And the moderator said, Dr. Williams, if you would be a president of George Mason University, what you would teach these Russian guys who would come, the young students? He said, I think it's a preposterous idea to believe that George Mason University can solve Russian problems. It's the same, he said, as to demand that gasoline stations should provide dental care for the people. So I would, to some extent, maybe disagree with him on that. I would say that it's better, definitely, to help if we can help, if we are willing to help. But this assistance, the main thing, as in healthcare provision, is do no harm. And in a lot of cases, this assistance does a lot of harm. For example, this IMF loans, $24.5 billion. And they are trying to bail socialism there, the same way as they tried to bail socialism in Mexico. And instead of, I mean, they would never, I would say, maybe I will hurt somebody's feelings, but when President Nixon died, there were plenty of programs about him on TV. And the people would say, well, he was kind of a disaster domestically, but he was a great foreign policy maker. And that was the strangest thing I ever heard, because I think he bailed out Soviet communism for another 15 or at least 20 years. Because that was it. I mean, they were providing grain to the country, which without grain would be forced at least to privatize their agriculture, to do something. But right now, putting all this aid, moreover, this aid comes with a lot of arrogancy, which is kind of, I mean, it's, if we are arrogant inside, why we should be we're arrogant in that. And this is also a preposterous idea that you can help people by shipping, for example, agricultural products to Russia, completely destroying their just emerging agricultural markets. I mean, can you imagine if there, say, will be another hotel like that, the government will build here, and everybody would stay there for free? I mean, what kind of competition you would... I was testifying before Agricultural Committee of the Congress when this Mr. Glickman, who is right now Secretary of Agriculture, was chairman. And he had a strange idea. I don't know why they invited me, but he had a strange idea. The Undersecretary for Agriculture said that, look, Russians have good prospects for harvest. I mean, they just a lot of grain, whatever. But they don't know how to store it. They don't know the transportation system is in disrepair, distribution system of. So what we should do, U.S. Department of Agriculture will send them next year 48 experts, USDA experts, all PhDs, to teach them how to pick up potatoes, how to harvest grain, how to store it, things like that. This is the most arrogant idea because, and that's what I said in my testimony, that Mr. Secretary, you never can teach anybody to pick up potatoes for free for somebody else. That's the problem there. It's not the problem that they know the storage or whatever. It's technical problems. Why technical problems are in such a bad shape? Because nobody cared. The same thing in healthcare. The healthcare profession was practically destroyed by the same irresponsibility which they had in other branches of the economy. They had the saying that they pretend they're paying us, we pretend we work for them. And it's fine if somebody is working in the military there, but if you have your own physician who is thinking this way, or if you have these guys at the Chernobyl nuclear power station who were actually, right now they released all this report about this accident. It looks like there was the crew of 6 people absolutely drunk. They were thinking what will happen if we'll turn this stuff to the right. And they found out. It's all man-made disasters.
I have a question regarding the Yeltsin regime.
Mm-hmm.
Some people say that it should topple and expect it to topple in the near future. And when I last heard several months ago, Clinton is still a pro-Yeltsin supporter and still wants to prop it up.
Right. Well, I think that it's obvious why he wants to prop it up. Because it looks like relations with Russia, at least the administration tries to present as the greatest achievement of Clinton. That's why he is inviting Yeltsin on these fundraising tours here. He is kind of promoting the idea that Russia is superpower number 2 still, and that that was his achievement, that he made them tame and whatever, which I think is not true. Yeltsin, 5 days ago, they had a public opinion poll, I think for US News and World Report, but Russians did it. Yeltsin's popularity is even lower than his friend in the White House. It's 5% right now, 5%. So that's why I don't know what will happen. Next year they would have elections. I think he will postpone them or something. Or the people will demand not to have these elections. There was if he would survive, he would survive until that time, because they had the Russian newspapers right now are quite an opposite they were 10 years ago. They had a big headline recently: "The fate of beloved motherland is hanging on his liver." saying that. Yes.
How is Gorbachev and Solzhenitsyn viewed by the average Russian?
How Solzhenitsyn and Gorbachev are viewed in Russia?
And by the average Russian?
Well, they're very different people. Mr. Gorbachev, he announced that he will probably run for the presidency. So he is already soliciting all kind of dirt and mud for himself. Mr. Gorbachev was a very tragic figure, I think, himself. He was a Communist Party apparatchik himself. He saw the system doesn't work, so he tried to, but instead of, he even didn't think the system didn't work. At first he had a ridiculous idea that people don't work. That system is okay, but people, they drink too much, they kind of lazy people, whatever. Bertolt Brecht, the actually communist playwright, but quite gifted one, he once said, thinking about this kind of mentality, that if the leaders lose the trust in the masses, they should dissolve the masses and elect new ones. and that's exactly was Gorbachev's idea. Gorbachev at first, he started in 1985 with a campaign against heavy drinking and alcoholism, which resulted in numerous deaths. It resulted in it was a complete disaster for the country. I mean, to remove the only kind of pleasure from the people, the only thing they could exercise, whatever. Arrogantly also, he would say, yeah, go to public library instead of drinking. That was his, his approach to that. Then he had all kind of bad things before he kind of realized that he should open it in the system. And so he came up with this glasnost, that means openness. The people started to discuss freely, for example, Soviet history. And then all the skeletons starting to pop out of the cardboards in numbers like 40 million. And so the regime was exposed for the last 70 years as a regime of crimes and lies. And so Gorbachev, I think he was not happy what kind of gin he let out of the bottle. And Gorbachev, but on another hand, I think he was good in destroying the system. When I just came to the United States, I was invited to Dick Cheney, who was Secretary of Defense, like to what's going on. And he asked a strange question. He said, do you think maybe this is all cosmetics just to fool us in the West? That maybe they just want to be stronger or whatever and disarm us morally and militarily? And I remember I said, Mr. Secretary, the patient is dead, the corpse is disfigured. I mean, what kind of cosmetics are we talking about? So that's how Gorbachev, who was really kind of an agent of change. I mean, on the good side, socialism doesn't work. But it would work rather efficiently, like it did in the 30s and 40s, when you shoot enough people. Because socialism does not have any incentives. I mean, you don't have any incentives to do anything. Because you will collect your kind of meager welfare benefits, but you will do that, irrespective of what you would do. I mean, so it was kind of an apathy. But to make people work, if they don't have positive incentives, then as psychologists would say, you should have negative incentives. That means you shoot a couple of people who are late to their jobs, then everybody starts to show up at time. And in the 30s, they literally were doing that. They had a law they introduced in 1939. The law kind of the laws were kind of Stalin's memos at that time. And so he created this law saying that you should get 1 year of imprisonment for each 5 minutes of being late to your. And so that's the later why it collapsed so kind of unexpectedly, at least for CIA here. It collapsed, I believe, because people realized that nobody would be shot anymore. So they have even a joke. Well, the end of the joke is that they run out of bullets. Great shortage of bullets. So that's on the bad side, the system collapsed. On the good side, literally nobody worked. And I had a secretary in the Bank for Foreign Trade, and I would see her picking up paper clips into her purse. I would say, Lena, come on, why you are stealing state property in such strange form? Paper clips. And she would say, Yuri, but there is nothing else to take from this, and she would use very bad word office. And that would be the prevailing mood. I mean, the prevailing kind of labor discipline. Mm-hmm.
For so long, then, the Soviet Union, under their militaristic totalitarianism, was providing external controls, external pressures, external ways of motivating out of fear and repression for people to do people within the country to do things, and all of this then collapses. Mm-hmm. It seems like it leaves a vacuum for what people, where the value system of the people comes from. If it's always been mandated from the state what their value system is and the ethics and the morals and all that, socially, in the issue of the morality of the country or the morass of the country, what is it like now and what's the solution?
Well, it is a tragedy because when communism, even when the people wouldn't believe in communism, a lot of them wouldn't know anything else. even economists I worked with. And so right now they kind of know, they have a kind of negative knowledge. They know that, they know communism, but they know it's not true. It doesn't work, it's wrong. So in a lot of people, it's the identity crisis is just enormous, especially elder people. With elder people, I mean, can you imagine if you are 65 years old and somebody would tell you everything you was doing is wrong. Everything was wrong. The whole history was crimes and lies. And you were part of it. And these people, some of them had hopes that what they're doing is bettering the society, would make whatever. There were mostly also a lot of people, I would say they would pretend they don't believe in communism, but they would kind of have a slight hope that there is something good in that. And then right now they also here in the United States, we have a backbone of society. We have, I mean, fringes, we have people on the fringes, left and right. But they are actually consolidating the backbone, consolidating the mainstream by being on the fringe. In the Soviet Union or in Russia today, there is no backbone. And this is very tragic. The Russian Orthodox Church is making its comeback, which is kind of good thing happening. Other religions are. But the political parties, some of them are just bizarre. I mean, the people are believing in all kind of garbage. Mr. Zhirinovsky, who is kind of a popular politician, he believes that was Freemasons and Jews ruined Mother Russia. There is a party against him, Russian Nationalist Party, which believes he is an Israeli agent infiltrated to Russia to scare the Jews out. And he presumably is getting $40 for each Jew he is sending to Israel. That's very sad. On the good side, there are some examples of very positive changes, especially in other parts of former Soviet Union. I was last year in Estonia. It's a small country, Baltic country, which right now is experiencing the highest rates of economic growth in Europe. It's absolutely, I was there 6 years ago, and it's a completely different world, I was amazed. I had a lunch with a gentleman who single-handedly wrote the Estonian Constitution. And that's, I think, even a good example for us. What he had, American Declaration of Independence, US Constitution, and Lord Acton's works. The only three sources he used. And in their preamble, they said the Creator created everybody equal and endowed them with unalienable rights, and just the quote from our Declaration of Independence. But the next sentence is, I was amazed. The next sentence is that only those people, as the whole history of the human civilization tells us, only those people who realize whom these rights came from can freely exercise them. It's quite yeah. And when I said this is pretty radical, he said, who endowed you with the rights? US Congress or Mrs. Clinton? That was his commentary. They have the prime minister who is 32 years old, who just changed everything, turned everything around. They completely, right now, overhaul the healthcare system, which they still have some rudiments of Soviet system as a system for the poor. But the new is emerging. I mean, because they said they privatized. That's another problem, is that it's the social experimentation on live people is very dangerous. That means that if we would socialize medicine, for example, or introduce HMOs everywhere, it'll be very difficult to get out of it. It's like a one-way street. To privatize something which was nationalized is the most painful experience, because, for example, in Russia today or in Estonia, if you privatize medical system overnight, then what would happen? And I would agree with that the hospitals will start to throw patients out of the windows. That's the way is that the fabrics of society is set, that if you go one way, it will be very difficult to come back, because you are destroying the defensive mechanisms of the people. They already really believe that the healthcare is a free good. So that's.
Yuri, a number of years ago, before I heard of the libertarian idea, I was a communist, pretty vigorous. And we thought at that time that socialized medicine was, excuse me, was probably the key to get a foot in the door to socialize America. Do you think there's anything more important or more key than medicine to get the socialized idea inculcated into the society, or do you think that's a myth?
Well, the whole idea of how to turn the country around would be, I mean, it's very difficult to say. They believe that, I mean, the people who promote the idea of socialism, they think right now, I believe, that healthcare is the kind of the weakest link in the system. That's a Leninist idea. That healthcare is the weakest link, that we have at least imaginary crisis there, or to my mind, not only imaginary but fabricated. Again, it's like Great Depression, for example, is used as an example of market failure, that market doesn't work. We need socialism. Otherwise, we'll have Great Depressions left and right. The same with which is completely wrong. The same with healthcare, that it's not a market failure, it's a government failure in healthcare problems we have right now. But it is used, again, by the bureaucrats to promote the idea that it's market. If you will ask a lot of people, I mean, in Wisconsin, they would think, yeah, look what your free market is doing. We have 30 million plus uninsured. But that's not the market again. It's the distortions of the market. And that's that's how the socialism can be. It's very dangerous to have crisis. And that's why, I mean, I was so appalled by this Oklahoma City bombing, because in Russia, several times in Russian history, they would already be close to success. For example, in the 1870s, when they had an emperor, Alexander II, who was already, he wrote a constitution. Russia would be supposed, it was 2 weeks that he was supposed to present this constitution. He was killed by the anarchists. They threw the bomb on him. Then Stolypin, another Russian reformer, was murdered in 1911. That was the other time that Russia skipped the chance of. And so to see the same things happening here, it's very, very sad. I mean, it also shows how divisive, I think, certain issues are.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, the hotel's going to come in here with the police in a minute.
Right.
I just want to thank you for coming. We, on behalf of APS, this has been very, very enlightening for all of us. And I understand that for this one-day session, we have approximately 20 or so states involved, represented here. I want to thank you all for coming this distance to this conference, and I hope it's